Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. I'm Jack, your average guy, 38, husband to Melissa, 35, and father to Emily, who just turned 10. I thought we had the typical suburban life, a nice house, good jobs, and a smart, sweet kid. But lately, I've been questioning everything. Melissa and I have been married for 12 years. At first, it was great. She was charming, confident, and always put together. I admired how she seemed to have it all figured out. But over time, that confidence turned into control. Melissa is obsessed with appearances, how our family looks to neighbors, her image on social media, and even how Emily behaves in front of others. It didn't bother me much at first, but over the years, the cracks started showing. I've always been close to Emily. She's a daddy's girl, and we love doing things together. Baking, working on school projects, or just reading stories at night. But Melissa? She's always criticizing Emily. If she gets a B instead of an A, if her hair isn't perfect, or if she doesn't act like a lady in public, Melissa is on her. It's heartbreaking to see Emily constantly trying to meet these impossible standards. But that's not even the worst part. About 3 months ago, Emily started saying strange things, like, "Mom says being nice to boys is weak," or, "You can't trust anyone, Dad. People always lie." I brushed it off at first. Maybe she misunderstood something. But it kept happening, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Then one day, while cleaning out the car, I found Melissa's phone on the passenger seat. She's always been secretive about her phone, so I'd never thought to check it. But that day, something made me look. And there it was, a stream of messages between Melissa and someone named Brad. They weren't work texts or casual chat. They were flirty, inappropriate, and intimate. My stomach dropped. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I started paying attention. She'd been coming home late, always with a plausible excuse, meetings, errands, or just needing some me time. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and I hated the picture they were painting. I decided to play it cool and started keeping notes. Every late night, every excuse, every comment from Emily that didn't sit right, it all went into a folder. I wasn't ready to confront Melissa yet. I wanted to be sure, and more importantly, I wanted to protect Emily. The hardest part is acting normal. Melissa still plays the role of a doting wife and perfect mom in front of others. But now, when I see her smile, it feels fake. Every word she says feels rehearsed. I don't know how this will end, but one thing's clear: I won't let Melissa's toxicity destroy Emily. She deserves better. I'll keep updating if people are interested. For now, I just needed to get this off my chest. Alright, here's the next part of the story. Things started getting messy after I found those messages on Melissa's phone. I was sitting on a ticking time bomb, and every interaction with her felt like a game of chess. I couldn't let on what I knew, not yet. I needed more proof, something concrete that Melissa couldn't twist into one of her usual manipulations. I started paying closer attention to her habits. She'd always been meticulous about her phone, keeping it password protected, face down on the table, and within arm's reach at all times. But after finding those texts, I noticed she'd started being extra cautious. Maybe she had a sixth sense that I was onto her. Then one day, Emily said something that chilled me to the bone. I was helping her with her math homework when she blurted out, "Mom says men are only good for paying bills and fixing things." I froze. I asked her what she meant, trying to stay calm, and she just shrugged, saying, "I don't know. She just says stuff like that when you're not around." It made me sick. I didn't want Emily growing up thinking relationships were transactional or that she had to manipulate people to get what she wanted. I knew I had to do something soon. A few days later, Melissa went out for one of her self-care nights. She said she was meeting a friend for dinner. It was the perfect opportunity to dig deeper. I checked our shared computer, and bingo, her email was still logged in. I found reservation confirmations for dinner, but not with a friend. It was with Brad. My blood boiled. They had been meeting at the same restaurant for weeks. I also found more messages, this time in her email. Brad wasn't just some fling, they were making plans, weekend getaways, future date nights, and even subtle digs at me. Brad joked about how clueless I was, and Melissa replied, "He's so trusting. It makes this too easy." My hands shook as I read that. She wasn't just cheating, she was mocking me. I took screenshots of everything and saved them on a secure USB drive. Then I backed up her texts using software I found online. It wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. I needed enough evidence to show the courts, in case this escalated to custody battles over Emily. Around this time, I also started noticing changes in Emily. She seemed quieter, more withdrawn. At bedtime she asked, "Why do people lie, Dad?" When I pressed her, she just said, "Mom says everyone lies to get what they want." I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just about Melissa anymore. It was about Emily's future, her sense of self-worth, and her ability to trust people. The final straw came a week later. Emily had a small incident at school. She spilled juice on her shirt during lunch and came home upset. Melissa's response? "You need to be more careful, Emily. What are people going to think if you're always a mess?" The way she said it made Emily's face fall. I pulled her aside later and told her, "Sweetheart, accidents happen. You don't need to be perfect for anyone. Just be you." She hugged me tightly, and I promised myself that I'd make sure she grows up hearing that more often. That night, I stayed up late making plans. Melissa had no idea, but I'd already started talking to a lawyer. I explained everything, her affair, her manipulation, and the emotional toll it was taking on Emily. The lawyer advised me to keep gathering evidence and document everything. If I wanted full custody of Emily, I needed to prove that Melissa's behavior was harmful to her. The stakes were getting higher, but I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about saving my marriage. At this point, it was about saving my daughter. After my talk with the lawyer, I started paying more attention to Emily. I wanted to protect her, but first, I needed to understand how deep Melissa's influence went. One evening, while I was tucking her into bed, she hesitated before saying, "Dad, Mom said you don't love her anymore. Is that true?" It was like a punch to the gut. Melissa was planting seeds, trying to turn Emily against me. I forced a smile and told Emily, "I'll always love you, and I'll always take care of you. You don't need to worry about grown-up stuff." She nodded, but the sadness in her eyes told me she wasn't convinced. Melissa, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing. She was still playing the perfect wife in public, bringing cupcakes to Emily's school events, posting pictures of family dinners online, and chatting with the neighbors like nothing was wrong. But at home, she was colder, more distant. Her phone was always in her hand, and she started locking the door when she took calls. One weekend, I told her I was taking Emily out for a father-daughter day. We went to the park, grabbed ice cream, and talked about everything: her favorite books, her dreams, and what she wanted to be when she grew up. She seemed more like herself that day, laughing and carefree. It was a reminder of why I was fighting so hard. Meanwhile, I kept collecting evidence. Melissa had no idea I was tracking her texts or that I'd saved the emails. One afternoon, while she was napping, I took pictures of her planner, which had handwritten notes about Brad meetups, disguised as spa appointments. I started preparing for the inevitable confrontation. I didn't know when or how it would happen, but I knew it was coming. Every time Melissa lied to my face, it chipped away at the little respect I had left for her. She thought she was untouchable, but I was biding my time. I wasn't ready to strike yet, but I was getting closer. And every moment I spent with Emily reminded me of what I was fighting for: a life free from Melissa's toxicity, where Emily could grow up happy, secure, and loved. The turning point came faster than I expected. One night, Melissa came home later than usual, reeking of wine and perfume that wasn't hers. She stumbled through the door, barely acknowledging me, and muttered something about a long dinner with the girls. I didn't push her, I just quietly watched as she made her way upstairs. The next morning, I found her jacket draped over a chair with a receipt sticking out of the pocket. It wasn't from a girls' night, it was from a fancy steakhouse across town, dated from the night before. I knew this place. It was where we used to go for anniversaries. The receipt had 2 entrees, a bottle of expensive wine, and dessert for 2. Brad's name wasn't on it, but I didn't need to see it to know. I pocketed the receipt, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. This wasn't just for me anymore, it was for Emily. I was preparing for the day when Melissa would try to paint herself as the victim, and I needed to be ready. Later that day, Emily and I were building a puzzle in the living room when Melissa came downstairs, scrolling through her phone. She glanced at us and said, "Emily, don't forget we have piano lessons tomorrow. You need to look presentable this time, okay?" Emily looked down, her confidence deflating in an instant. I cut in, keeping my tone calm but firm. She's fine just the way she is, Melissa. Let her enjoy being a kid. Melissa rolled her eyes. I'm just teaching her how to make a good impression. You wouldn't understand. It was a small comment, but it hit a nerve. I couldn't let Emily keep absorbing these subtle digs and controlling remarks. That night, I started writing everything down, every incident, every time Melissa put Emily down, every time she lied to me. I needed to paint the full picture of what life in our house had become. I still wasn't ready to confront Melissa, but her mask was slipping. She didn't even realize how obvious her behavior was becoming, or maybe she just didn't care. Either way, I was getting closer to my breaking point. A week later, I overheard something that shook me. Emily and I were playing cards in the living room when Melissa called her upstairs. I stayed put, trying to give them privacy, but their voices carried through the vents. Melissa was speaking in her usual sharp, instructive tone. You can't always trust people, Emily. Even the ones you think care about you can hurt you. Remember, you have to look out for yourself first. Always. Emily's voice was small. But Dad says you should be kind and trust people who love you. There was a pause, and then Melissa said something that chilled me. Your dad doesn't understand how the world works. People take advantage of kindness. Don't be like him. I sat there, my blood boiling. Emily's innocence was being chipped away, and Melissa was the one holding the hammer. This wasn't just about her cheating anymore. She was actively undermining me as a father and poisoning Emily's outlook on life. When Emily came back downstairs, I could tell she was uneasy. I tried to keep things light, but I could see her retreating into herself. After she went to bed, I sat in her room for a while, watching her sleep. She looked so small and fragile, like the weight of Melissa's words was too much for her to carry. I knew I couldn't wait much longer. Melissa's influence was becoming more toxic by the day. I decided to make an appointment with a lawyer to go over everything I'd gathered. I was determined to protect Emily, no matter what it took. The wheels were already in motion. It was only a matter of time before Melissa realized I wasn't as clueless as she thought. The opportunity to confront Melissa came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday morning, and Emily was at a friend's house for a sleepover. Melissa was lounging in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't hold it in any longer. Melissa, we need to talk. She looked up, mildly annoyed. What about? I pulled out the receipts, screenshots and emails I'd gathered over the past few weeks. I laid them on the counter in front of her. About Brad. About your lies. About what you've been doing behind my back. Her face went pale for a split second, but she quickly recovered, feigning indignation. Are you seriously snooping through my stuff? That's a huge invasion of privacy, Jack. I didn't let her deflect. Don't turn this around on me. This isn't about privacy, it's about your affair. It's about you lying to me and Emily. Melissa scoffed, crossing her arms. You're being paranoid. Brad is just a friend. I stared at her, amazed at her ability to keep up the act. Friends don't make dinner reservations at romantic restaurants. Friends don't send messages about sneaking away for weekends together. Stop lying, Melissa. She started pacing the kitchen, her composure cracking. You've always been so controlling, Jack. This is why I needed someone to talk to. Brad actually listens to me, he understands me. Her voice was rising, but I stayed calm. This isn't about you feeling understood. This is about you betraying our family. And what's worse, you're dragging Emily into this. Do you even realize the damage you're doing to her? Melissa froze at the mention of Emily. For a moment, I thought she might show some remorse, but then she snapped, "Don't act like you're the perfect parent. You coddle her. She needs to learn how the real world works, and I'm the only one teaching her that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Teaching her what? That you can't trust anyone? That lying and cheating are normal? That's not the real world, Melissa. That's your version of it. The tension in the room was unbearable. Melissa glared at me, but for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. I knew I'd hit a nerve. I didn't push further. I simply said, I've talked to a lawyer. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to protect Emily. You might want to start thinking about how this ends for you. Her face twisted with anger, but she didn't say a word. She just stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. The lines were drawn, and Melissa knew it. This wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of the fight for Emily's future. The house was eerily quiet after Melissa stormed out. I sat in the kitchen for a while, letting the weight of the confrontation settle. This wasn't the resolution. I knew Melissa wouldn't back down that easily. If anything, her silence was more dangerous than another argument. She was plotting her next move. Later that evening, she reappeared as if nothing had happened. She didn't mention the fight, didn't acknowledge the evidence I had shown her. Instead, she acted overly cheerful, asking about Emily's sleepover and planning a family movie night. I saw through it immediately. Melissa wasn't trying to reconcile, she was trying to regain control. She was a master manipulator, and this was her way of pretending everything was fine while she figured out how to counter me. That night, I stayed up late reviewing my notes and evidence. I added details from our argument, her deflections, her lack of denial, the way she turned everything into an attack on me. It was exhausting, but it kept me focused. If this went to court, I couldn't leave anything to chance. The next day, I saw the first sign of Melissa fighting back. While Emily and I were playing outside, Melissa joined us, her phone in hand. She snapped a picture of us and immediately uploaded it to social media with a caption about cherishing family time. I could see the game she was playing, building her image as a devoted wife and mother, just in case this turned public. The problem was, Emily wasn't fooled. Later, she came to me with a worried expression and said, "Mom keeps saying she loves me, but it feels weird. Like she doesn't mean it." I hugged her tightly. "You never have to doubt how much I love you, Emily. No matter what happens, I'm here for you." She nodded, but I could tell Melissa's behavior was confusing her. I hated seeing Emily caught in the middle of this mess, but it made me more determined to see it through. Melissa could play her games, but I was one step ahead. That evening, I emailed my lawyer with the latest updates. I explained how Melissa was starting to shift gears, trying to build her case for custody. The lawyer assured me that the courts would see through it if I stayed consistent and documented everything. The battle lines were officially drawn. Melissa was gearing up for a fight, but so was I. And if I had to go through hell to protect Emily, I would. The days that followed felt like a strange chess game. Melissa's behavior swung wildly. One moment, she'd act sweet and motherly, and the next she'd be cold and distant. It was exhausting to navigate, but I focused on staying consistent for Emily's sake. One evening, Melissa asked to talk. Her tone was disarming, almost regretful. "Jack, I don't know what's happened to us," she said, sitting across from me at the dining table. "We used to be so happy. I don't know how we got here." I stared at her, trying to gauge if this was genuine or another ploy. "You know exactly how we got here, Melissa." She sighed dramatically, tears welling up. "I made a mistake, okay? But it's because I felt so alone. You've been so focused on Emily, on work, you don't see me anymore. I knew better than to let her twist this." "So your solution was to have an affair? To teach Emily that lies and betrayal are okay?" "Melissa, this isn't just a mistake. This is who you've become." Her face hardened instantly. The tears vanished, replaced by a cold glare. "You're not perfect, Jack. You're trying to paint me as the villain, but you're just as much to blame for this as I am." I stood up, done with her manipulations. "I'm not playing this game with you. If you can't take responsibility for your actions, then we have nothing to talk about." She didn't follow me as I left the room. Instead, I heard her muttering under her breath, something about me being impossible. I knew I'd hit a nerve, but I also knew this wasn't over. The next day, I noticed Melissa spending more time on her phone. She was texting constantly, her face a mask of frustration. It didn't take long to figure out why. When she stepped out to take a call, I glanced at her phone on the counter. She'd left the screen unlocked, and the text thread with Brad was open. The messages confirmed what I suspected. She was venting to him about our confrontation. "He thinks he's so righteous," one text read. "He has no idea what's coming." Another message stopped me cold. "If he tries to take Emily, I'll make sure he regrets it." I snapped a picture of the conversation before putting her phone back in its place. My heart was pounding. Melissa wasn't just fighting to save face, she was preparing to escalate things. That night, I made another call to my lawyer. I told them about the texts and the growing tension at home. "We need to move fast," I said. "She's not going to go down without a fight." The lawyer agreed, advising me to finalize my custody plan and be ready to file if things got worse. It wasn't what I wanted, to tear apart our family like this, but Melissa had left me no choice. For Emily's sake, I had to keep going, even if it meant taking on Melissa's threats head-on. A few days later, Melissa made her first bold move. I got home from work to find her and Emily sitting at the kitchen table. Melissa was smiling, the kind of smile she puts on for show. Emily looked uncomfortable, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "Jack," Melissa said sweetly, "we've been talking, and I think it's time we started doing more things together as a family. Emily needs to see us united." I knew this was a setup. She wasn't trying to repair anything, she was building her case. "That sounds nice," I said carefully. "What do you have in mind?" She leaned forward like she was pitching a business deal. "Maybe a weekend getaway. Just the three of us. We could go to the lake, like we used to." Emily glanced at me nervously. "I don't know, Mom," she mumbled. "I have homework." Melissa's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "It's important to make time for family, sweetie. Homework can wait." I crouched down to Emily's level. "It's up to you, kiddo. If you'd rather stay home, we'll figure something else out." Melissa's gaze burned into me, but Emily nodded. "I think I'll stay home, Dad." Later that night, Melissa cornered me in the bedroom. "What was that about?" she demanded. "You're undermining me in front of Emily now?" I stayed calm. I gave her a choice. "That's not undermining, it's parenting." Melissa laughed bitterly. "You're such a saint, aren't you? Always the perfect dad." I didn't take the bait. "This isn't about me, Melissa. It's about Emily. She's not a pawn in whatever game you're playing." Her face turned cold. "You think you're so clever, but you don't know what you're dealing with, Jack." She left the room before I could respond. I sat on the bed, replaying her words in my head. They felt like a warning, or maybe a threat. The next morning, I made a decision. I called the lawyer and told them I was ready to move forward. "She's starting to involve Emily in her games," I said. "I can't wait any longer." They walked me through the next steps, filing for custody, presenting the evidence, and preparing for the inevitable backlash from Melissa. It felt overwhelming, but I reminded myself why I was doing this. Emily deserved better. Melissa thought she had control, but she didn't realize I was already making my move. The clock was ticking, and soon, she'd have to face the consequences of everything she'd done. The day I filed for custody was both terrifying and liberating. My lawyer submitted the documents, along with all the evidence I'd collected, emails, texts, the receipts, and detailed logs of Melissa's toxic behavior. It felt like I was lighting the fuse on a bomb, but I knew it was the only way to protect Emily. Melissa had no idea what was coming. That evening, she was unusually cheerful, making dinner and humming to herself. I couldn't tell if it was an act or if she genuinely thought she still had control of the situation. After Emily went to bed, Melissa turned to me, wine glass in hand. "I've been thinking, Jack. Maybe we should go to counseling. For Emily's sake." It was laughable, really. Counseling was the last thing Melissa wanted. She just wanted to look like she was trying. "Counseling's a great idea," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I think it'll show Emily we're doing everything we can to make things right." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she smiled. "I'll look into it tomorrow." I went to bed knowing that by the next day, she'd find out about the custody filing. I wasn't sure how she'd react, but I braced myself for the fallout. The storm hit the following afternoon. Melissa was in the middle of a phone call when the envelope arrived. She tore it open, her face darkening as she scanned the documents. "What is this, Jack?" she shouted, storming into the living room. I put down the book I was reading and met her glare. "It's exactly what it looks like. I'm filing for custody of Emily." Her voice rose to a near scream. "You're trying to take my daughter from me? Are you out of your mind?" "I'm trying to protect Emily," I said evenly. "This isn't about punishment, Melissa. It's about what's best for her." Melissa's face twisted with rage. "You think you're better than me? You're not. You don't even know what you're doing. You're going to destroy her life." I stood my ground. "What's destroying her life is the way you treat her, the way you use her as a pawn in your games. She deserves better." She was shaking now, her voice breaking. "You're going to regret this, Jack. I'll make sure of it." With that, she stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I didn't know where she went, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sliver of relief. The fight had officially begun, but at least the cards were on the table now. Upstairs, I checked on Emily. She was asleep, clutching the stuffed bear I'd given her years ago. Seeing her so peaceful reminded me why I was doing this. No matter how messy things got, I wouldn't back down. Melissa thought she could intimidate me into giving up, but she was wrong. This wasn't just a fight for custody, it was a fight for Emily's future, and I wasn't going to lose. Melissa's reaction to the custody filing was worse than I expected. She came back late that night, slamming doors and throwing things around the kitchen. When I didn't come downstairs to engage with her tantrum, she started sending texts instead, long venomous messages accusing me of everything under the sun. "You're a terrible father, Jack. Emily will hate you for this," one text read. Another said, "You've always been weak. That's why you'll never win." I didn't reply. I knew better than to play into her hands. Instead, I forwarded the texts to my lawyer as more evidence of her behavior. The next morning, Melissa switched tactics. She was all smiles at breakfast, acting like the night before hadn't happened. She even made pancakes, something she hadn't done in years. "Emily," she chirped, "how about a special girls' day this weekend? Just you and me." Emily hesitated, glancing at me. "Can Dad come too?" Melissa's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "This is our time, sweetie. Daddy can join us another time." Emily nodded reluctantly, and I could see the gears turning in her head. Melissa's attempts to bond with her felt forced, and Emily wasn't buying it. Later, I asked Emily if she wanted to spend time with her mom. She shrugged. "I don't know. It feels weird. Like she's trying too hard." I reassured her. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. It's okay to say no." That weekend, Melissa went through with her plan, taking Emily out to the mall and for lunch. When they came back, Emily was quiet, clutching a new doll Melissa had bought her. "How was your day?" I asked her. She gave a half-hearted smile. "It was okay. Mom said I shouldn't tell you everything we talked about." That sent a chill down my spine. "You can always talk to me, Emily. About anything." She nodded but didn't say more. I knew Melissa was trying to wedge herself between us, and it made my resolve even stronger. In the following days, Melissa escalated her efforts. She began posting more photos of her and Emily on social media, captioning them with things like "mother-daughter bonding time" and "she's my whole world." It was all for show, a way to build her image before the custody battle. But behind closed doors, her true nature slipped out. One night, I overheard her on the phone, venting to someone, probably Brad. "He thinks he can take her from me. He doesn't have a chance. Emily belongs with me. He's just trying to make me look bad." I recorded part of the conversation, just in case. I hated doing this, but Melissa wasn't leaving me any choice. The cracks in her perfect facade were widening. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. After I filed for custody, Melissa went into full-blown damage control. Every move she made felt calculated to discredit me. She started showing up to school events she normally avoided, talking to Emily's teachers, and volunteering for activities she had never shown interest in before. At first, I thought she was genuinely trying to improve, but it quickly became clear it was all about appearances. She made sure to document everything on social media, photos of her helping with class projects or standing proudly next to Emily's art displays, always captioned with things like, "So proud of my little superstar." Emily, however, wasn't fooled. One night, she came into my room, looking confused. "Dad, why is Mom acting so different? She's being nice. Like, really nice." I knelt down and said, "Sometimes grown-ups try hard to show the best version of themselves, even if it's not how they really feel. But you don't need to worry about that, okay? Just be yourself." Emily nodded but stayed quiet for a while, as if she were piecing together something big. Meanwhile, Melissa started reaching out to mutual friends. She painted herself as the victim, claiming I was trying to rip our family apart. A few friends who barely knew the full story reached out to me, asking if everything was okay. One friend, Liz, was more direct. "Jack, Melissa told me about the custody filing. Is it true you're trying to take Emily away?" I didn't dodge the question. "Yes, it's true. But I'm doing it because I believe it's what's best for Emily. I have evidence of things Melissa has done, things you probably don't know about." Liz hesitated, then said, "She's been telling people you're controlling, that you don't let her be the mother she wants to be." I sighed. Melissa is great at making herself look like the victim. But Liz, Think about how often you've actually seen her put Emily first. You've known us for years. Liz was quiet for a moment before saying, "You're right. I can't remember the last time she showed up for Emily without a reason to brag about it." Her words reassured me that not everyone was buying Melissa's act. Then came the meeting with the court mediator. It was the first official step in the custody process, where Melissa and I sat down with a neutral third party to discuss what was best for Emily. Melissa walked in dressed like she was attending a charity gala, all smiles and sweetness. "Hi Jack," she said in an overly friendly tone, as if we hadn't been at war just days ago. The mediator started by asking us both to outline our concerns. Melissa went first, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "I'm just worried about stability for Emily. Jack's been so distant lately, and I'm not sure he understands the emotional needs of a young girl. I've always been the one she turns to." It was hard not to laugh at her audacity. When it was my turn, I calmly laid out the evidence I'd gathered, her inconsistent parenting, the toxic comments she'd made to Emily, and the affair. I handed over the texts, emails, and a detailed timeline of events. Melissa's face hardened as the mediator reviewed the documents. "This is all out of context," she snapped. "Jack is just trying to make me look bad." The mediator, to their credit, didn't take sides but made it clear the evidence would weigh heavily in the custody evaluation. Melissa's composure began to crack. That evening, Melissa lashed out at me the moment Emily went to bed. "How dare you bring up private conversations in front of a stranger? You're disgusting, Jack." I didn't rise to the bait. "You're mad because the truth is coming out, Melissa. You don't get to rewrite the narrative this time." She stormed off, slamming the door to our bedroom. I stayed on the couch that night, as I had for weeks. As much as the fight drained me, I could feel the momentum shifting. The court was seeing Melissa for who she really was. It wasn't over yet, but the cracks in her story were growing deeper by the day. And through it all, Emily remained my focus. She was the reason I kept going, even when the stress felt overwhelming. The battle wasn't just for custody, it was for her future, and I was determined to win. After the court mediation, Melissa shifted into overdrive. She was losing control, and her desperation was showing. Suddenly, people in our circle began acting different. Conversations felt stilted, and a few mutual friends avoided eye contact when we bumped into each other. The reason became clear when my friend Ben called me. "Hey Jack, I don't want to stir the pot, but Melissa's been saying some pretty wild things about you. I thought you should know." "What kind of things?" I asked, already bracing myself. "She's telling people you're an absent dad and that you've been emotionally abusive to her. She even implied you might not be stable enough to take care of Emily full-time." I laughed bitterly. "She's really reaching now." "Look," Ben said, "I know the truth, but not everyone will. You should be careful, she's playing dirty." Melissa's smear campaign wasn't just talk. She began posting vague updates on social media, clearly aimed at me. Things like, "It's sad when people can't take responsibility for their own failures," and "Being a mother is the hardest job, especially when you're doing it alone." Her followers showered her with sympathy, commenting things like, "You're so strong," and "Emily is lucky to have you." It was sickening, but I kept my cool. Every post was another example of her manipulating the narrative, and I made sure to document them for the custody case. Meanwhile, Emily started asking more questions. "Dad, are you and Mom mad at each other? She keeps saying we should spend more time together, just us." I knelt beside her. "Mom and I are working through some grown-up stuff right now. But no matter what, I'll always be here for you, okay?" She hugged me tightly, but I could tell she was confused. The tension between Melissa and me was affecting her more than I realized, and it broke my heart. Then, Melissa made her boldest move yet. One morning, I got a call from Child Protective Services. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I was neglecting Emily. I was stunned. Neglect? That's absurd. Emily is my world. The caseworker explained they were required to follow up on all reports. "This is just a routine check," she assured me. Still, I felt the sting of humiliation as I walked her through our home, showing her Emily's clean room, her homework neatly stacked on the desk, and the meals I'd prepped in the fridge. The caseworker asked Emily a few gentle questions, and my daughter, bless her, confidently told them how much she loved spending time with me. When the caseworker left, she said, "It's clear there's no issue here. Sometimes people use us to settle personal disputes. I'm sorry you had to go through this." I knew exactly who had filed the complaint. Melissa was trying to paint me as unfit, hoping to gain leverage in the custody battle. That night, I confronted her. "You called CPS on me? Really, Melissa? Using our daughter like this?" She didn't even deny it. "I'm doing what I have to do to protect Emily." "No, you're doing what you have to do to protect yourself," I shot back. "And it's not going to work." The caseworker saw right through you. Her face twisted with anger, but she didn't respond. She just grabbed her coat and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I called my lawyer the next morning to update them. They weren't surprised. "It's a common tactic in cases like this," they said. "But her behavior is only helping your case. Keep documenting everything." I was exhausted, but I wasn't going to let Melissa's games break me. The court date was approaching, and I was ready to lay everything on the table. Melissa thought she could manipulate the system, but she underestimated one thing: I was fighting for Emily, not for revenge. And that made all the difference. As the court date drew closer, Melissa's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. She was unraveling under the pressure. Small things started slipping. She'd snap at Emily for minor things or forget her school pickup time, then cover it up with elaborate excuses. One evening, Emily came home looking upset. "Dad, Mom got mad at me because I didn't wear the shoes she wanted," she said quietly. "What happened?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "She said I was embarrassing her in front of her friends," Emily whispered. "But I just wanted to wear my sneakers." I reassured her. "You don't have to wear anything you don't want to, sweetheart. You're perfect just as you are." Emily nodded, but the hurt in her eyes stayed with me. Melissa's obsession with appearances was seeping into every part of Emily's life, and it was taking a toll. Meanwhile, Melissa was ramping up her efforts to discredit me. She started scheduling meetings with Emily's teachers and the school counselor, claiming she was concerned about Emily's well-being. One teacher pulled me aside after school. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to let you know, Melissa has been saying some troubling things about you," she said hesitantly. "What kind of things?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "She's implied that you're not present enough in Emily's life and that you don't support her emotionally. I don't know the full story, but I thought you should be aware." I thanked her and assured her that I'd always put Emily first. The teacher gave me a sympathetic nod. "For what it's worth, Emily talks about you a lot. It's clear she feels safe with you." Melissa's desperation wasn't just limited to the school. She began texting me constantly, accusing me of being manipulative and threatening to expose me in court. At first, I tried ignoring her, but the texts grew more aggressive. "You're trying to ruin me, Jack. Do you think Emily will love you more after you take her mother away?" One text read. Another said, "You're a coward. You'll never be able to handle raising Emily alone." I forwarded everything to my lawyer. Each message was another piece of evidence showing her instability and manipulative tactics. But the worst blow came when Melissa brought Brad into the equation. She introduced him to Emily during one of their girls' days, framing it as a casual meeting with a friend. Emily told me about it that night. "Mom had her friend Brad over," she said, looking uncomfortable. "He kept asking me questions, like what my favorite things are and if I like spending time with Mom." I clenched my fists, furious. Melissa had no right to involve Brad, especially after everything. But I kept my voice calm for Emily's sake. "How did you feel about him?" Emily shrugged. "He was nice, I guess. But it felt weird. I don't know why he wanted to know so much about me." That was the final straw. I confronted Melissa the next day. "You brought Brad around Emily? Are you out of your mind?" She crossed her arms defensively. "He's part of my life, Jack. She has a right to know him." "No, Melissa," I said firmly. "She has a right to stability, to feel safe. Bringing a stranger into her life while we're in the middle of this mess is irresponsible." Melissa rolled her eyes. "You're just jealous. Brad's better with her than you are." I didn't take the bait. "This isn't about me. It's about Emily. And you're proving over and over that you care more about your image than her well-being." For the first time, Melissa looked unsure. Her bravado faltered, and for a split second, I thought she might admit she was in over her head. But then she straightened up and snapped, "You'll see, Jack. The court won't fall for your lies." That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The stress, the anger, the endless fight, it was exhausting. But then I thought of Emily, asleep upstairs, clutching her stuffed bear. She was my reason for all of this. Melissa's mask was slipping, and the truth was coming out. It was only a matter of time before the court saw it too. I just had to hold on a little longer. The finish line was in sight. The court date arrived, and the atmosphere was heavy. Melissa walked into the courtroom dressed to impress, her confidence radiating like armor. She gave me a smug smile, but I stayed focused. This wasn't about her or me, it was about Emily. The proceedings started with both sides presenting their cases. Melissa spoke first, painting herself as a devoted mother. She emphasized her recent involvement in Emily's school, claiming I was detached and overly critical. She shed a few tears, perfectly timed for effect. Then it was my turn. My lawyer presented the evidence, the texts, emails, receipts, and even the CPS complaint that Melissa had weaponized against me. When the recording of Melissa's phone conversation with Brad was played, her composure cracked. The judge asked her directly, "Ms. Carter, can you explain this conversation?" She stammered, her previous confidence dissolving. "It's been taken out of context," she said weakly. The turning point came when the court heard from Emily's school counselor, who testified about Melissa's manipulative behavior and Emily's preference for being with me. The counselor's words hit hard. Emily feels safer and more at ease with her father. She's expressed anxiety about meeting new people her mother brings into her life. Melissa's face paled as the court processed this. When the judge delivered the ruling, it was clear Melissa had underestimated the impact of her actions. I was granted full custody, with Melissa receiving supervised visitation until she could demonstrate more stability. She sat there in stunned silence, her earlier bravado completely gone. As I left the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. This wasn't a victory to celebrate, it was the result of a fight I never wanted to have. That evening, I sat with Emily in her room, helping her unpack some of her favorite books and toys into a new shelf we built together. She looked up at me and asked, "Does this mean we're staying here, Dad?" I hugged her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart. We're staying. You're safe." Melissa's actions had cost her everything, but Emily and I were finally free to build a new life together, a life where trust, kindness, and love could thrive. And that was all that mattered.